Chapter 14, Tracking Guns in Reno, Nevada. Indio's black Lincoln Navigator rounded the corner of Virginia and 4th Streets in front of the Silver Legacy Hotel and Casino, with its white, half-globe roof and gilded, neo-imperial entryway. The 6 homies riding in the vehicle, Psycho, Indio, Fantasma, Cholito, Pelon, not Peloncito, and Casper, wanted to roll high in style. It was 2:30 in the morning, but they had made no reservations. The purpose of their trip was to meet a Reno-based MS-13 clique leader supplying guns to the gang members up and down the West Coast. Casper was along for the ride to scope out the Reno network for Santini, who intended to shut it down. When they showed up at the Silver Legacy's front desk, the clerk took one look at the thugs and excused himself. He returned from the back office a moment later, typed on his keyboard as if he were double checking and doing everything he could to accommodate the unexpected group. "I'm sorry," he said, "we're completely booked." The homies stood there for a moment. Were they getting the brush off because of the way they looked? They shrugged it off and walked away, heading back to the Navigator, except for Psycho, who stared at the clerk with seething malice. "Come on, dog," Indio said to Psycho. He was holding the lobby door to the street open, urging his brother, whose temper and proclivity for violence he knew very well. "Vamos, homie." Satisfied he had intimidated the clerk well enough for disrespecting him and his posse of senior marreros from San Francisco, Psycho finally turned and walked away. In the cool nighttime desert air, the homies huddled around the SUV. "What the fuck are we gonna do now?" Cholito said. "I'll call Negro," Pelon said. While he made the call, the other homie stood on the sidewalk in front of the Wicked Ink tattoo parlor. Fantasma scoffed at traditional tattoos displayed in the window. "That ink needs to spell MS, homies," he said. "Fuck yeah, homie," Psycho said. "Mark of the beast." "Hola," Pelon said into his phone. "Si, we are in Reno, downtown." The other homies quieted down to hear Pelon's conversation. "Si," Pelon said. "No, they ain't got no rooms, homie." "Si." "It's no problema." Any change in plans like this to stay at Negro's place, now instead of the Silver Legacy, fed into Casper's natural paranoia. If the gang already discovered he was a rat, this whole trip to Nevada could be a setup to whack him in the desert and leave his body for the buzzards and coyotes. Negro greeted Casper and the other homies at the front door and showed them into the living room, signaling for them to be quiet so that they didn't wake up his mother. Exploiting the relatively lax laws of Nevada and the state's frequent large gun shows to obtain a supply, he sold mostly to his MS-13 cohorts in California, Arizona, and Washington state. Negro rented a garage in Sparks, Nevada to store most of his guns, but he still had some nice pieces in the house to show off to his homies from San Francisco. Through a network of straw purchasers, he acquired large quantities at legally sanctioned gun shows in Nevada. Straw purchasers were easy to find in the state, and Negro, leader of the MS-13's Reno Lacote Sureños RLS clique, had several on his payroll. He told the homies that a big gun show called the Crossroads of the West was coming to town next month, and several of his buyers would be in attendance. Crowds stretching a quarter-mile long around the convention center just a few miles from the border with California would be lining up to shop for guns and purchase them with no background checks required. Early after sunrise the next morning, Casper and the other homies scarfed a biscuit breakfast at one of Reno's second-tier casinos. They then proceeded to follow Negro to a residence at the West University section of the city that served as headquarters for the RLS clique. Here, they met 3 additional gang members. During the homies' conversation about the situation with the local MS clique, Casper learned they consisted of only about a dozen members total, but they were actively recruiting. A surprise honored guest was also present. Casper was stunned when he met the woman whom he thought was a fictional character in the world of MS-13, a middle-aged female Salvadorian known as La Negra, who had close ties to the big homies. Casper had heard of her many times, typically described as a messenger for the gang's top bosses in Central America. She traveled around the United States visiting cliques and performing inventories, then reporting back to the big homies about clique member headcounts, revenues they generated, and any strategic conflicts with other gangs. Still paranoid, Casper worried La Negra's presence in Reno might signal that a planned assassination of him was in the works. Meanwhile, the other San Francisco homies considered it an honor and privilege to spend the whole day with La Negra. They partied the afternoon and evening away, barbecuing and telling her stories about gangbanging in the States and Central America. During the festivities, one of the RLS homies pulled out an M16 rifle and boasted he could obtain many more of them if any 20th Street homies were interested. Psycho paid $150 for the 22 caliber handgun Negro showed off the previous night. Pelon took a shotgun on credit since he didn't have the $200 in cash on hand to pay for it. He said the rifle would be a community gun for 20th Street's use and that he'd collect the funds at the clique's next meeting. Both guns came fully loaded with rounds to spare. Shortly after Casper returned to San Francisco, relieved he had not been whacked, Santini directed him to make a monitored phone call to Negro. As a senior member of 20th Street, Casper inquired about chasing additional firearms from Negro, who said he would be happy to oblige. Santini went to work with a plan to dismantle MS-13's Reno-San Francisco gun supply chain. As a senior member of 20th Street, Casper inquired about purchasing additional firearms from Negro, who said he would be happy to oblige. Santini went to work with a plan to dismantle MS-13's Reno-San Francisco gun supply chain. He would start by targeting homies in the Bay Area and who were on the trip with Casper to Reno. As for Negro himself, setting up the leader of the gang's multi-state gun trading operation would take a little more time and finesse.